So this is fascinating. Victor Davis Hanson, who is a military historian, conservative commentator, was a favorite, from what I understand, of Tucker Carlson and Tucker Carlson's show. But now he is coming out very much against the alt-right, the conspiratorial, anti-Semitic parts of the right in America, if you can even call them on the right. It's just quite extreme, to be honest. It's grievance culture, it's scapegoating politics, and he speaks to Coleman Hughes about this on the Free Press on his fantastic podcast Conversation with Coleman, and I'll put the link to the full thing down below. But I want to show you a section of this where he basically is coming out against Tucker Carlson and explaining what's going on from his perspective, at least, why this fracturing has happened, why Tucker and others are taking the views that they are, the Groypers, the alt-right, the Fuentes and all the rest of it. This is his analysis. Have a watch, and I'll see you on the other side.
You wrote an article for the Free Press recently about Tucker Carlson. I think that by the time this episode comes out, that article will be out. What has gone wrong with Tucker, and why is he platforming and glad-handing people that are pushing conspiracy theorists and the bad kind of revisionist history as opposed to the good kind?
I don't know. That's the question, seems, because I was a very good friend. He was, 7 or 8 years ago, he asked me to come on Fox, and we had a good relationship, and I usually went on every Monday night after the monologue. There were things that were a little eccentric, like UFOs, and some topics that he was interested in. But more or less, there were parameters or guardrails that he operated within. And I would call him a MAGA conservative, but more libertarian than MAGA. And then I think it was kind of abrupt and probably unfair the way he was fired. And there's a long backstory to that. But he was on a Friday night, and all of a sudden they fired him. And he had the largest audience really in Fox News history, larger than Bill O'Reilly's even. And then he got his own platform, and I don't think there were people saying to him, this is too far. And I think the people around him were encouraging him to be more edgy. And when you're autonomous and entrepreneurial like that, the more controversial, the more clicks or whatever we call it happen. That's just one exegesis, but there soon developed a pattern when he introduced a pastor from Bethlehem, and we all know that the Christian population of Bethlehem on the West Bank went from 80% Christian to 10%, and that happened mostly under West Bank Palestinian Authority. And where did they go? They went to Europe, they went to the United States, but about 150,000 went to Israel, and there's about 180,000 Christians. So when Tucker interviewed this person who has to say something that his Islamic Palestinian overseers approve, Tucker just took it as gospel that the Israelis had ethnically cleansed the Christians out of Bethlehem, and that the Christian Zionists should look at that. And yet these Christians were living with more freedom anywhere in the Middle East, in Israel, many of them. And Israel's Christian population has steadily grown, while the population of Christians in Gaza and West Bank has steadily declined. That's just one example that I don't know why. Or when he had the eulogy of Charlie Kirk, you remember Coleman, he said something that it's sort of like a bunch of people from the Middle East, in a room with eating hummus, talking about Christ. I guess the obvious simile was that Charlie Kirk was Christ, and the modern Pharisees in a room had engineered his death. So, and then when he had Candace on, and he had Nick Fuentes on, he had David Cullum, the revisionist, he had Daryl. There became a pattern. I should say at this point, very quickly, and I'll stop, there's nothing wrong if you want to have an edgy, out of the ballpark figure, if you're willing to cross-examine him. William F. Buckley had his brand in those firing line episodes was to have people like the convicted rapist Eldridge Cleaver, like the known segregationist George Wallace, with a kooky eugenicists, William Shockley, to have Huey Newton. But if you look at those episodes, he cross-examined them. He tried to tell the world that these people are out of the ordinary and they're trying to persuade you, but I'm going to cross it. So if he really wanted to take the risk, and I don't think he should have, because you're giving him a platform he didn't deserve, like Fuentes. But Candace maybe is a different story, or Marjorie Taylor Greene. If you give them a platform and their views are out of the mainstream, you have an obligation as a journalist to cross-examine them. And especially when you bring on your former close friend and colleague in the conservative movement, Ted Cruz, and you just eviscerate him in an ambush. I saw that interview. Mm-hmm. Tucker is a very bright and sophisticated interviewer. So I just said to myself, why would you, if you're a conservative, and Ted streams in the conservative mainstream, why would you humiliate him on screen, but then you wouldn't use those same techniques when you could have done the public a service with Fuentes?
No, it's a great point. I mean, like, why would he absolutely dig into Ted Cruz for not knowing off the top of his head the population of Iran, which I admit he should have known.
Yeah.
But why would he absolutely humiliate Ted Cruz for saying that? And then when Nick Fuentes comes on and says, I love Joseph Stalin, he just says, okay, let's put a pin in that and come back to it very politely, right? Yeah. So it's clear he's using one set of tactics on people that are pretty well within the American mainstream, and I think broadly mean well, and putting on kid gloves essentially for conspiracy theorists and crazy people. I mean, the Stalin one is, I mean, something's going on here where I remember there is a blog post, can't remember what it was. It was kind of a joking blog post defending the Empire in Star Wars, right? Mm-hmm. And it was actually very funny. It was a funny exercise in how you could make that case. But something's going on the internet and on social media where it just will get eyeballs and clicks to just defend all of the actual villains in history. And if more and more people believe this stuff, then it turns out there are actually no bad people that have ever existed on Earth. Hitler was great. Stalin was great. Mao was great. I mean, the left has been making that case for a long time. Actually, everyone you thought was bad from history that killed and slaughtered millions of people for bad reasons, they were all actually great. And there's, when someone comes in and gives that take, it shocks the senses in a way. It's like adding hot sauce to your podcast, and it gets eyeballs. It gets a lot more eyeballs than a boring recitation of the facts we know are true about history. And it's worrisome for our information landscape that that's what's going on right now.
It is, and I think there's another catalyst. It's not the main one. What you said about clicks and a way of getting attention by being controversial or even beyond controversial is, I think when you interview a Nick Fuentes or a Candace Owens, you know that if you criticize them, they're going to go right out and start a jihad against you, if I could use that term. But when you tear apart Ted Cruz, he's in the mainstream, he's a senator, he has certain standards of behavior. He's not going to go out like Nick Fuentes had attacked Tucker all the time. He'd call him a sellout, a Fed, a traitor. He'd attack Trump. So I think there's a tendency when you get these extremists, even though when I look back at some of the interviews that Buckley did with Eldridge Cleaver versus other controversial people like Saul Alinsky, he was a little bit more careful because he thought Eldridge Cleaver, and same thing with George Wallace, he thought, you know what, these people are a little out there and you never know what they're going to say or do or to get obsessed with me. So I think that's one of the causes. The dark cause is that somehow he feels that he was done a disservice at Fox, that there were certain cosmic forces in the Dominion suit that he was the scapegoat, that he was sort of a paleocon. And there's two groups that he, on the air in the last days, as you remember, Colin, that he had a fixation on and felt that they were, in fact, he said one group, I hate them more than any other people in the world. And they were Christian Zionists, he said, and neoconservatives. Both of those are synonyms for Jewish interests, whether we like it or not. And he was always saying the neocons got us into the war. They've got it. And why did we get in Iraq? And we got in Iraq for Israel. And then he would say, you can be against, which is true, you can be against the Israeli government and not Jews. But when you keep talking about Israel in a conspiratorial fashion and why we're supporting them, why is that? And ultimately the subtext is there's powerful Jewish forces, and then the neoconservatives fit that bill. So those are the two groups that he is angriest at, because he felt that they put us in a multi-trillion-dollar war as if there was no, the Don Rumsfeld or Condoleezza Rice or Dick Cheney, as if they are not free thinkers and they're subject to Jewish influence, like a Paul Wolfowitz or Richard Pearl. It didn't really make sense. And the same thing was true about Christian Zionists. And he mentioned John Bolton. I don't really consider him a staunch Christian, but Mike Huckabee, as if Mike Huckabee, who is very religious and very pro-Israel, but I don't think he has a lot of influence with Marco Rubio, for example, or others in the Trump administration.
Yeah, I mean, I think I told you this when we were at a conference recently, but I had Dave Smith on my podcast for 3.5 hours. And I think we spent like a good hour just on this topic of who are the neoconservatives? Did they in fact get us into Iraq? Hint, they were into Iraq, but not for any reason having to do with Israel, right? Yes. So he believes Israel got us into Iraq, which is actually the opposite of the truth. The prime minister of Israel told us not to go into Iraq, that it was a stupid idea. Not only that, the more the neoconservatives, these supposedly evil people, come out and talk in public, the more it's just clear that they're American patriots that had legitimate foreign policy-based reasons to have their opinions. Like David Wormser, for example, who is the author of the now infamous Clean Break Memo. He came out on a podcast recently. I think this was after my Dave Smith episode, so I hadn't seen it. But he came out and sort of explained not only himself, but also the Clean Break Memo. He served in the Navy for like 10 years. He's an American patriot. His mother, this was an astonishing fact, David Wormser's mother was apparently the head of the underground resistance to communism in the Czech Republic. And fled to America, escaping the Soviets after World War II. And she had also fought the Nazis. So he grew up in a context where America was the haven for freedom, and under a mother that deeply hated communism. Like that was his DNA going into being Dick Cheney's advisor. Nothing to do with Israel. Nothing to do even with Judaism.
And remember, there was a group, I think it was formed in 1998 because they felt that Bill Clinton had been lax on enforcing the no-fly zones from the 91 war. And in addition,
the Project for a New American Century.
Yeah, it was Bill Kristol and Robert Kagan. But there were a lot of people in there. Francis Fukuyama, I think, was in it. Don Rumsfeld was in it. Dick Cheney was in it. And they had advocated a preemptory strike on Iraq, but there was no support for it in the Clinton administration. There was no support for it before 9/11 in the Bush administration. George W. Bush ran. I went back and looked at that because I had remembered it. I thought it was a fantasy of my imagination, but he had said repeatedly he didn't believe in nation building, that Bill Clinton was too involved in the Balkans. And you know what I mean? We're not going to go in there and solve the problems of the Balkans. The military is there. And Colin Powell had already said it's a pottery barn theory. If you go in and break something, you own it. So you got to be careful. So they didn't, what I'm getting at is whatever neoconservative conservative influence there was, it was pretty inert until 9/11. And after 9/11, people said, we've tried to deal with Saddam. He breaks all the rules. The Taliban have been out of control. All of these people represent a general coalition of radical Islamicists. And then, they always talk about WMD, but if you look at the United Nations resolutions, I think there was 21 of them authorizing the U.S. Congress, and then later the United Nations for Afghanistan. But in the case of Iraq, the U.S. Congress, 21 of them, and I looked at them the other day, and I remember them very clearly. We got to save the Marsh Arabs, that the architects of the 91st World Trade Center bombing, Nadal was there. Abu Nadal was being in sanctuary from Saddam Hussein. They have violated the no-fly zones. They have liquidated the Kurds and tried to exterminate them. They had a lot of reasons other than just WMD, which I think were only 3. So I think it may have been wrong or right, but the idea that David Frum and Max Boot and Richard Pearl and Bill Crystal all conspired, Elliot Cohen, to get us into a war against our interests. And you're right, Israel strongly disapproved. They thought it was a misdirection of Western resources.
So some really interesting points there from Victor. First of all, just big picture, what's fascinating here is how we're seeing anti-Semitism mutate. It doesn't always come wearing a swastika. Sometimes it comes wrapped in intellectual language of nuance or anti-establishment rhetoric. We mustn't forget, by the way, that many of the Nazis, senior Nazis tried at Nuremberg, had PhDs. Intelligence or intellectuals and morality are not synonymous, necessarily. In fact, we learn that one of the things that happened when Adam and Eve ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil is that instead of there being a world of truth and falsehood, it became a world of good and evil, right? Because they're eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And what evil is able to do is to make you justify evil and make you think that it's true. To justify falsehood and make you think it's actually good. For Adam and Eve, they looked at good and bad as true and false. But now it's good and evil can make you think evil is good and good is evil. It can make you rationalize, which I heard a rabbi once explain to me that rationalize you can split up to be rational lies. It's exactly right. And we're seeing a disturbing revival of these old tropes happening now with a supposedly respectable face to it. I'm just asking questions. Jews or Israel as the secret hand behind wars, media and foreign policy, just being repackaged for a social media age. And it's ironic, people who claim to be telling the truth the mainstream won't are just recycling conspiracy theories that have been debunked for nearly a century. And he's exposed the logic well. If Israel supposedly pushed the Iraq war, why did its own prime minister tell America not to go in and to focus on Iran? The facts completely flip the narrative, as they always do. And notice how the word neoconservative often becomes code for Jewish, even when the people being talked about aren't even Jewish. It's a very convenient dog whistle. There's this idea that criticizing neocons or Zionists somehow isn't anti-Semitic, but if your theory always ends up with the Jews are behind it, maybe you need a new theory. In fact, I have to share with you something. This is so funny. So Diploact put together a little video. This is so funny, of Tucker Carlson talking about how it's so boring we keep going on about Israel. Have a watch.
Stop talking about Israel all the time. Israel, 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 Israeli, Israel, 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 Israel. Stop.
So brilliant. Absolutely love it. But you can see, just with a bit of digging, this is the point about anti-Semitism, just do a bit of digging, it's not difficult, and you'll see that it's just completely incoherent. It's like people can't handle the idea that, Israel is just a legitimate country, is successful. And more than that, I think they're struggling to grapple with this idea of Israel as a chosen people, meaning chosen for a mission to bring God's light into that world. And it forces them to confront all kinds of theological realities. There are some Christians who have dealt with that and embraced that the Jews have their everlasting covenant with the Jewish people maintained. That, by the way, is I saw Brandon Tatum give a fantastic video about this recently. Maybe I'll share that with you in a future video, where he basically said, I don't understand. If God says he's got an everlasting covenant with you, that means it's everlasting. If God can break his promises, well then, I don't know really what to make of this God. Everlasting means everlasting. And so the Christians that have come to terms with that, they're the ones that embrace Israel the most, the evangelical Christians. So this is theological, I think, and I think that is with Tucker Carlson as well. But it's shocking what ideology and these theological grievances, let's say, against the Jews can do to people. That it can literally make you rewrite World War II rather than accept that the Nazis were evil. And we used to think about anti-Semitism more as hatred and ignorance. And what we're seeing now is a sort of performative contrarianism as one of its outlets. You say the most outrageous thing and you sound the most clever that way. But you know what? It matters today, all of this, because the same people who say Hitler wasn't that bad or the Holocaust was exaggerated are often the same ones saying that Israel is the new Nazi. It's the same psychological trick flipped on its head. And part of the problem is that the internet rewards outrage, not truth. So for some influencers, saying Hitler wasn't all that bad, that gets more clicks than saying he murdered 6 million Jews. That is a sickness within our culture right now. So when you see these revisionist takes getting millions of views, remember that it's not history they care about. It's actually monetizing hatred and grievances. And that's why the work that we're doing and all those who are fighting for truth, our work is so essential. And we must know, we must remind ourselves and give confidence to ourselves that in the end, the truth will prevail. Before you go, you have to check out the trailer for our new documentary on Moshiach, the Jewish belief about the Messiah, what he will do, how the world will look after his coming, and why his arrival is close. And if you want to watch the full thing, just click the link below in the video description. For thousands of years, the Jewish people have carried a promise that history is not a random cycle, that suffering and darkness and exile are not the end of the story, that one day the world will be redeemed and the Messiah, the Moshiach in Hebrew, will come. But what does that actually mean? Who is Moshiach? When will he come? How will we know he's real? Why would God design a world that waits so long for redemption in the first place? And what will life feel like after he comes? With AI and machines beginning to replace work, maybe we're already catching a glimpse. But then what will we do with our days? The prophets spoke of that world long ago. In this groundbreaking JTV Plus documentary, we uncover the truth about the Jewish vision of the Messiah, who he is, why it matters, and why his coming could be closer than you think. Join us as we reveal the truth about history's most anticipated figure. To watch this JTV Plus documentary and access much more premium content, click on the link in the video description.